I am Bob Lingle, and this is the Good Neighbor podcast. This is a place where I connect with authors and the community. We use this time to discuss life, sometimes death, but always books. I hope you enjoy our conversation today, and I hope you get something out of it. The world is a pretty confusing place right now, so let's do our best to be good neighbors. Hi, neighbors. Our guest tonight is New York Times bestselling author of The Silver Linings Playbook, which was made into an Oscar-winning film, and 8 other novels, including We Are the Light, a #1 Indie Next Pick and a Book of the Month selection. The Hollywood Reporter has named him one of Hollywood's 25 most powerful authors. Matthew lives with his wife, novelist Alicia Bessette, on North Carolina's Outer Banks. I'm happy to introduce tonight Matthew Quick.
Hey, it's great to be here, Bob.
Yes, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Thank you, Avid Reader Press, and your editor, Jofi Ferrari Adler. Jofi introduced your book to me over the summer. I had a chance to read an early copy of it and just had become obsessed with it. I have 3 young kids, and it's difficult for me to stay up late at any point in time, but the kids helped by not sleeping well. So I was just in the room reading by my book light until the battery dimmed out. And then I just had to make this call of like, do I go to sleep or do I find a new light to finish this? And I slept for a couple hours, woke up and finished it the next day. It's been a while since a book has hit me the way that We Are the Light did. Normally I go through the proper channels of reaching out to either Jofi or your publicist. Instead, you are the biggest named author. We've done a lot of virtual author events. You're the biggest named author that we've had. And I was intimidated to ask the question of, hey, can we do this? And I had signed up for your newsletter, and I think it was after the October newsletter, and I forgot exactly what you said in there. Well, I think you were talking about your anxiety of heading into your book tour. And I'm like, I don't want to add to his anxiety. But now after reading this, I really want to talk to Matthew Quick. So I replied. I didn't know if I was ever going to get a response back, and you responded pretty quickly. And I'm just very appreciative that you're taking the time to talk with me and talk with our community here in Lakewood. And whoever else may be watching anywhere. So thanks again. Yes.
Yeah, definitely not adding to my anxiety. I love talking to indie bookstores and readers, and it's an honor to be here tonight.
And you didn't have to travel, so that's
that is a huge plus. I'm in my house. I feel introvert safe. You know, it's a wonderful thing, Zoom. So it's all good.
I share your travel anxiety. I don't do it often. I'm going to Winter Institute in Seattle in February, and for the American Booksellers Association, and I have been stressing about it. Like, the trip is in 2 months, and I've been stressing about it for the previous 2 months. The amount of my wife was watching me for 2 hours just struggle to book a flight and pick a seat on the airplane. She's like, I'm so glad that you don't have to travel on a regular basis for your job.
What'd you go with? Did you go with aisle? Did you go with window?
I think I mixed it up because I have to take 2 flights to get there and 2 flights back. So I think I went aisle, window, aisle.
Okay.
And I stressed over the numbers, where I was in relation to the wing. It was a scene.
I can relate.
Book this. And then I finally booked it, and then 2 weeks later they changed the flight on me anyway. So
yeah,
thanks United Airlines.
Yeah, such is the way with travel. Yes. For sure.
So let's get into the book. We Are the Lights. If you wanted to provide a synopsis for the book, because you're probably more adept at the elevator pitch for this than I am.
Yeah, sure. It's, the first thing I like to say is the book it's about radical love. And I think we live in a time now where everything is so polarized, and when tragedy happens in our neighborhoods, in our city or in our country, we all have a lot of emotions, and we tend to get pushed to these polarized views. And so We Are the Light is what happens when somebody resists that instinct. And so the book begins, in the beginning, we have this character by the name of Lucas Goodgame, and he has lived through this horrific tragedy in a movie house, a shooting in a movie house. He's lost his friends, he's lost his wife, and the whole town has declared him a hero. Only he doesn't feel like a hero, and he goes into this depression afterwards. He's grieving his wife, and the first thing that happens is that he reaches out to his Jungian analyst, who he had relied on for a long time, and the Jungian analyst ghosts him because he had also suffered loss through the tragedy as well and just can't deal. And so Lucas very heroically decides that he's going to write letters to his analysts. And through reading these letters, each chapter is a letter, we get to explore Lucas's psyche and how he deals with the grief and the aftermath of this tragedy. And early on in the novel, one of the high school students that Lucas was counseling, he's a high school counselor, sets up a tent in his backyard, in Lucas's backyard. It's a young man by the name of Eli, and kind of forces this relationship with Lucas, draws him out. Eli happens to be the brother of the shooter, and he's been ostracized by the town. And he had nothing to do with the shooting, but the town has projected all of their shame and hate onto this boy unfairly. And Lucas's heart goes out to him, and they decide together to join forces, and they're going to create this art project for the town and invite everybody to participate in this project. And their idea is that they can save the town through community, art, and love, and compassion. And so it plays out in hilarious fashion and sad fashion, and all the spectrum of emotions that you might imagine. But the book is really not about the shooting in the movie house. It's about this community banding together after this tragedy, and the way that one man decides to try to unite the community and move forward. And so I think it's a timely novel. As I've been going around the country talking about this, I've been talking about the need for depolarized spaces. I've been talking about positive masculinity, and people have seemed really hungry for these messages as I've been going around talking about these things.
And I wished that the note that was inside the advanced reader copy was in every copy that went out to customers, because it just kind of provided a layout of what was going through your mind approaching this project. And I appreciated it. And in dealing with this project and how you're approaching it, you were really struggling with writer's block for a bit. Can you talk about that struggle?
Yeah, sure. So first thing I'll say is that essay is available on LitHub, and you can find it on my website. If you go to the We Are the Light page, and then you go down to interviews, and you click on the LitHub link, you can get to that essay. But yeah, so I had been trying to write this novel since 2014. It was born out of this event that I did at the Ambler Theater in Pennsylvania, where they did a one book, one town. And it happened to be held in this historic movie house called the Ambler Theater, which is actually depicted on the cover of the novel. In the novel, it's a made up movie theater called the Majestic Theater, but they actually use the cover art. It's the Ambler Theater. And so when I was in this event, it was not long after the Aurora shooting in Colorado, and I'd always been a big movie guy. I love going to the cinema, and I was a teacher too. And anytime there's a shooting or a tragedy, it's horrific, and it affects me. But after the shooting in Columbine, after that happened, I never was afraid to go into a school. I was horrified by what had happened, but I never thought, oh, I can't go into a school anymore. But after Aurora happened, when I go to the movie theater, I was always looking around. I was nervous, a little bit paranoid, especially when the lights went down. And so when I was doing this event in the Ambler Theater, I'm up on stage where the movie screen is, and it's a packed house, and everybody was super lovely that evening. I remember my signing line being very long, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful night. But the whole time I was up on stage, there was this voice in my head that was saying, like, "Are you safe up here?" It was like this paranoid thought that was new, and it bothered me. And I remember afterwards going out for drinks across the street from the theater at this bar with the librarians, and coming out and standing on the street facing the Ambler Theater, looking at the lit up marquee as I was waiting for my car to pick me up, and thinking, I need to write about a historic movie house. And so I tried to write this book for years and failed. I just kept failing. And I wrote other novels and published other novels. Fast forward to 2018, and that is the year when I quit drinking. And it was in June of 2018, and I got 100% sober. I've been flirting with sobriety for a long time. And when I got sober, I did not have a problem keeping away from alcohol. Once I made that decision not to drink anymore, that was it for me. But the thing that I was really surprised about was all of these things that were waking up inside of me, all of these paranoias, these fears, these unresolved issues from the past that was keeping numb with alcohol for 25 years. And I was a very functional alcoholic. You know, and no one ever said to me, "Oh, you have a problem," but behind the scenes, I was consuming a lot of alcohol to keep afloat. So when I gave that up, immediately I was hit with writer's block. And I had never had writer's block before. And when I say writer's block, I mean I would sit down at the computer right at this very desk that I'm at right now, and I would try for 8 hours to write a sentence, and I would fail every day for years. And I used to pump out 10, 12 pages in a day. That was an average thing for me. And it was taking me a year to write 10 pages. And I would show them to my wife at the end of the year, who Alicia's also a novelist, and she would cry because the pages were so bad. It was like, I just could not write anymore. There's a lot of reasons why, and we can get into that later if you want, but things got so bad after about 3 years that I entered into Jungian analysis. And I very quickly bonded with my analyst, who is a man that's older than me, in a way that was healing, intense. It felt very paternal to me. And I felt like somebody was showing up twice a week and really had my best interests at heart. And immediately the dark part of me started thinking, this can't last. Like, this can't be real. If this will surely be taken away from me. And so I got very paranoid about my analyst suddenly dying or being hit by a car or having a heart attack, or even that I would say something wrong in analysis and he would get mad at me and, you know, not want to work with me anymore. It was complete paranoia.
Mm-hmm.
But after a while of this, I started thinking, you know, can I bring this into the creative writing wrestling ring and make art out of it? You know, which is what I've done throughout my life since I was a teenager. I've taken my mental health issues, I've taken my fears about the world, and I write about them, you know, and that has always helped. And so I started writing this novel, and then I thought, well, wait a minute, what about that old idea I had about the movie house? And then when I combined those two things, I started messing around with that. And then my wife had told me, you know, you can't write fiction, but you're able to write letters to people, because I'm a big letter writer. I love writing emails. I've had email pen pals for years. I like to write handwritten letters to people. And she said, you can write letters, so why not try to write another book in letters? And I didn't want to do that. If I had already done that with The Good Luck of Right Now, it felt gimmicky. I know some people don't like epistolary novels, but then the writer Nick Butler, who's a good friend of mine, he without knowing Alicia had said that, he said the same exact thing to me. He's like, dude, you write to me all the time. Why don't you try to write a book in letters? And so I very reluctantly went up and decided to do this. And when I typed in the words, "Dear Carl, comma," it was like writer's block was over. It was like a magic spell. And so I've been telling people that I did not want to write a book in letters. It was the only way that I could write a book. And I tried very hard not to do that. I tried many other ways. That's the only way that this book would come out of me. And I think even the subject matter wasn't something that I particularly wanted to write about. It was something that I needed to write about. It was something that I felt colonized by, that I needed to process. So I felt haunted by it. Both of those paranoias that got married to create the novel.
Jungian analysis. I was not familiar with this at all before reading your book. Can you kind of give us an introductory of what it is and how you got into it?
Sure. Well, the second question's easy. I got into it. Well, I'd always been young curious, and I'd always kind of bumped up against his ideas, the ideas of Carl Jung.
Mhm.
Um, but I never took a deep dive. And then at the end of my writer's block, well, I didn't know it was the end of my writer's block, but 3 years in, my wife found the podcast, This Jungian Life. And basically what this podcast is three Jungian analysts. They get together every week. They talk about an issue of the day through a Jungian lens, and they analyze somebody's dream at the end. And she found it very helpful to her. And I had a particular storytelling bent because they're always analyzing stories and myths. And she said, I think this would help you. And so I listened to the podcast, and I'm thinking I'll just listen to one of these to appease my wife, and then, I'll never listen again. And I found it fascinating. And, 1 hour turned into two. And then for about 2 months, I pretty much did nothing but listen to this podcast. And it really spoke to me. And so what attracted me to Jungian analysis? What is Jungian analysis? It's this idea of meeting once a week with your analyst, the person, and taking a deep dive into your psyche, figuring out who you are and who you are meant to be. What was supposed to incarnate through you in this lifetime? And Jung called that individuation, and it's kind of almost, it's not something that you actually expect to fully have happen to you. It's almost like the Buddhist way of enlightenment. It's a goal that you shoot for. But
Mhm.
what Jungian analysis, the people ask me, what is the difference between that and therapy? I've never been in therapy, so I can only guess. But what my analyst tells me and what I've experienced is that it's not about finding a quick solution or taking away symptoms. So my analyst, when I came to analysis at first, I said, I'm depressed and anxious. He says, good, that's telling us something. Go into that. Get more depressed, get more anxious. What is that telling us? And we look at myth, we look at stories, we do symbolic interpretations of dreams, which is very much what I do when I write a novel, and I take my ideas and I create a myth, I create a story. And so we use story as medicine in Jungian analysis, which is obviously the storyteller that's very attractive. But the other thing is it's a really deep and intense bonding experience with another human being in a safe container. And it's a place where I can expose all of the different parts of me. And I think we go through life, we have these very carefully constructed personas where we think, what does the world want? And we're gonna show the world that part, and all the parts that we think that the world doesn't want, we're gonna stuff deep inside. And in the analytic container, the goal is to bring all of those things out, even if they're ugly or we're embarrassed about them, and to become whole again. So we're not splitting off the parts of us that we think society doesn't want. We're taking all of those parts and putting them back together and becoming whole. And that's the work,
Mhm.
and a lot of that splitting off happens at a very young age. And so it's going back and working through those early traumas of childhood, and figuring out who is Matthew Crick, and who is he going to be for the rest of his life in a very conscious way. So much of our lives are controlled by unconscious forces. We're not even aware of why we're doing half of the things that we're doing. So my analytic experience is about finding out those whys and figuring out who we are meant to be. But I should say also that
Mhm.
trying to describe what Jung's theories are, there are hundreds and hundreds of books, and I am not an expert by any. I'm about 2.5 years into my journey, and for the first year, all I did was Jungian analysis, study Jung, and I feel like I'm not even. It's just the tip of the iceberg. So it's a long journey. I'm still learning.
Well, it gave me a better sense because in reading the book, like it was an initial hurdle for me. I'm like, I don't know what a Jungian analyst is. So like, it was kind of like when I'm reading a book and it has a name that I'm not sure how to pronounce, I just fill in a name and that becomes the name for the book. I'm like, all right, therapist. And that was enough for me to like figure that out until I had time to revisit the idea. And then I had listened to your episode of this Jungian Life,
Oh,
Your
cool.
Honor. So that kind of gave me a better sense, but hearing you talk through it gives me a better understanding, because it has been it was a hurdle for me getting into the book just after the first couple of chapters, but then just in pitching the book to customers, like, it's a Jungian analyst, and some people are like, "Oh, I'm familiar with that." I'm like, "Oh, good," because I was. And,
Well, I prefer learning opportunity to
yes,
hurdle, and
yes,
I think,
yes.
I remember Sarah Schulman when I was at Goddard, she was always saying that people like to learn, and I think that that's one of the reasons why we engage with novels. So it's one of the reasons that I do. I love to learn, so. But I do understand, it's
Mhm.
there's a comfort zone, and there's plenty of information about Jung online. It's just a quick Google away.
Yes.
Yeah.
You had mentioned before that this kind of story, like getting into a shooting at a theater, wasn't something that you wanted to do, but needed to do. And it kind of gets into, how do you approach writing something that makes you uncomfortable? What kind of
Well,
headspace to get into?
I think I heard David Foster Wallace say this first, and I don't think this is his original line, but when I started writing, one of my mantras after I heard this was, that writing is supposed to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comforted, and I think that is something I think about often. Um, I think that it's important to leave our comfort zone, both as writers and as readers. But with this particular story, I knew that I did not want to write a book about a shooting in a movie house. That's not what this book is about. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's frustrating because even people who love the book, when they're asked, "What is this book about?" They're like, "It's about a shooting in a movie house." I'm like, "No, it's not. It's literally not even really in the book.
Mhm.
It's about a, a, a reeling community, a community in the aftermath of that coming together and having this beautiful healing moment is what it's about. So the first thing was I knew that I wanted to concentrate on relationships and community, and I knew that I wanted to make this book life affirming. And I think that was the most important thing. And sometimes when you look at the internet or you look at the news, it can be so overwhelming because the camera is always pointing at the darkest possible um, thing that it can point at. And I wrote a book a few years ago, as well, it's a lot of years ago now, called "Forgive Me, Leonard Peacock." And the book is about a young boy in his 18th birthday who takes a gun to school. And, it's all the whole ticking clock of the book is, will he or won't he? And one of the reasons why I wrote that book is because whenever there's a shooting in a high school, we all rush in to cover, the news covers that, and the tragedy, the horror. But as a former high school teacher, I sometimes get frustrated that nobody goes in to cover the day when the gun doesn't go off. Like every day when there's not a shooting in a high school, there is some saint in the high school taking care of kids' emotional and mental needs to make sure that doesn't happen. But that never makes the news. We never focus the camera on that beautiful thing that there's no tragedy today, but nobody cares. But that's a miracle that there was no tragedy in the school today, because there are men and women in that school that are taking care of kids and showing them love and getting them through the day in a safe way. And I think that for me, I wanted to put the camera on that aspect of the tragedy, the healing, the love. And the book is about two brothers in essence. You have Eli and Jacob, and Jacob walks into a movie theater and shoots people. Eli picks up a movie camera and shoots movies. And I've been talking about what is the difference? Why does one brother do one and one brother does the other? And it's complicated, it's nuanced, but I do think that one community loved one of those boys and the other boy didn't know love. And I think that that was really important. So I wanted to focus my camera on the boy who was taken care of and found a way in the community to be loved, particularly by the men in that community, and what happened because they loved this boy. Like that's where I wanted to point the camera. I didn't want to point the camera on the boy that didn't know love and committed this horrific tragedy, because I think that's the story we hear over and over and over again. We don't focus so much on what happens when things go right in a community,
Mhm.
particularly in these relationships between young men and older men, and this need for for fathering, and father hunger, what Robert Bly calls father hunger, I think is just, it was a big thing in my life. And I think it's a big thing in a lot of young men's lives, especially young men that are teetering towards, tragic ends. They're just yearning to be fathered, to be loved by older men. And as I've gone around the country and talked about these things, there have been young men in at every stop. And when I talk about this particular aspect of the book, they just lock in and their eyes just light up. Like they're so hungry for this message, and to know that they are not only worthy of receiving love, but also giving love too. I think there are a lot of young men out there that are hurting, and they're desperate to know what is the right path forward, because they want to contribute in a positive way. And I think as a society, we're always focusing on, toxic masculinity, which is definitely a problem. Like we need to fix toxic masculinity, but sometimes it makes me sad that we hear the words toxic masculinity in the mainstream all the time, but how often do we hear the words positive masculinity? How often do we hear, oh, here's this toxic person in Hollywood or whatever, and but how often do we say, oh, here's this guy in this community that's being a great example of a man. Let's give him some praise, and let's put him on the internet. Let's put him on the news. We don't see that as often, and I think that that's a problem. And so when I wanted to approach this novel, I wanted to make sure I was focusing my camera on those things.
It is like you are not only reading through my notes, but reading through them in the exact order of things that I wanted to, because the next thing
me there, you're taking me there.
In terms of positive masculinity, in the letter that I recommend people, I'll find the link to it and I'll share it through our social media so people can read your essay that is
cool.
in
Appreciate
the
that.
reader copy. But you had talked about, in addition to your wife, you kind of had built up this team of men around you that kind of helped guide you through this process of both your sobriety and getting through writer's block and working on this project. Lucas, the main character of the story, has a similar group of men that kind of build up around him. Was that kind of reflective of what you were experiencing in your life, and also like to dive deeper into the idea of positive masculinity? What are you hoping that people will take away from this book in that regard?
Well, I think to answer the first question, yeah, it absolutely was reflective of what I was going through during that dark period. Was, I had a lot of shame. I had a lot of embarrassment about my situation at the time. And, early sobriety was, my ego took a huge hit. It was like my ego was just devastated. I just, and it didn't make sense because I had opportunities, I'd had success, but these things they're not often logical. It was I stopped drinking, and all of these things that I had repressed for 25 years just came, and they were like monsters. And my instinct was to hide. My instinct was to spend a lot of time alone in my house and to run alone in the woods. And there are a few men in my life that really heroically kept showing up. I have a friend down here in OBX. He's a realtor. He's my best friend here. He said, we're going to have lunch once a week. And he showed up every week, and we'd have that lunch for an hour. And it seems like a simple thing, but when you're depressed, when you're feeling down, that was life-saving. That was an act of love. It was heroic. A good friend of mine by the name of Kent reached out and said, hey, let's start a movie club. And so we started taking turns picking a movie once a week. And there were usually films we hadn't seen before, all throughout the ages. And we would watch them, and then we'd get on the phone for an hour and talk about them. And, we were analyzing film, but it was also, he was saying, hey, I'm not going to go away. I'm not going to let you disappear. Likewise, my brother and I started having a talk on Saturday morning, every morning at 9 o'clock on Saturday. To this day, we still do that. And, he just kept showing up, and we just kept talking, and our relationship deepened. Most of the relationships I had with men through my 20s and 30s revolved around alcohol and football. Those were the two things. And when I stopped drinking, I also really lost interest in watching professional sports. And I think because it was so intertwined with drinking, it was hard for me. And And so I lost that kind of what I thought was like this vehicle into, having relationships with other men, like this common language, so to speak. But a funny thing happened. Some of my other friends that I have one friend by the name of Eric, and he was my college roommate. And for 20 years, all it was beer and football. That was all we talked about, and he had a near death experience. A propane tank exploded and put him in the hospital. And he woke up from that a changed man, and he entered into therapy, got some help for himself. And it created this opportunity at this time where he reached out and we started talking. And all of a sudden, we're not talking about beer and football anymore, but we're talking about what does it mean to be a man in America? And what are we going to do with the rest of our lives? And we're talking about the mental health work we're doing. And so I never dreamed that would ever be possible with Eric. And now we're at the point now where we talk a couple times a month, and our talks are epic. They go 90 minutes, 2 hours. And at the end of every one, he tells me I love him. I tell him I love him too. He came out to my event at the Ambler, gave me a big hug. These were things that I never even dreamed were possible 15, 20 years ago. So, I think that the transformation and the letting go of, what I used to do with men, drinking and sports, really created this space that has been filled by things that I find more meaningful. And I'm not trying to moralize here or say that drinking and football is bad, or I just think that why that was fun for a long time, it was an impediment toward these deeper conversations and these deeper relationships. And I think that a lot of men they really crave intimacy, but they fear it. And so you go to the football game and get drunk. That's the only time you can really hug your friend, in a socially acceptable way. But I found that, sober, having intimate relationships with my guy friends, those hugs are much more meaningful now, and they're much more honest. And so how is that reflected in the novel? Well, Lucas goes through this horrific tragedy. He loses his wife. He has this complicated relationship with the feminine anyway. And, his best friend Isaiah comes, and Isaiah's a religious man. Lucas is not a religious man, but Isaiah is constantly praying for Lucas. He's constantly touching him. He's constantly checking up on him. He's constantly hugging him. I had this really beautiful, intimate relationship that is based on love for each other. And I think in my early sobriety, the thing that really saved me over and over again was learning how to accept love. And, those examples I gave, my brother showing up every Saturday at 9 o'clock was an act of love. And I had to learn how to accept that love as love. Or my friend Chubis down here, who is going to lunch with me, our friend Kent, at doing the movie stuff. It was an act of love, and I had to learn in early sobriety how to accept love and to feel that I was actually worthy of love. And that is a journey that Lucas goes on. Like, he feels horrific about what he had to do during this tragedy. He doesn't think he's worthy of love. Yet this boy shows up and sets up a tent in his backyard. He's desperate to be loved, desperate. He needs it. And Lucas finds a way to rise to the occasion. His friend Isaiah comes and checks up on him and prays for him and hugs him and loves him back into health. I think these are examples of positive masculinity. Men stepping up, inserting themselves into a situation altruistically and bettering an entire community by doing that, not for self-gain, but for other people's gain. And I think that men are hungry to know how to do that. And I think that in some ways they're waiting for permission for society to allow them to do that. And I'm not sure that that's such a good idea, but I think that men are hungry to contribute in positive ways. And I think we need to encourage that. And I think we need to give examples of that. And so the book for me was a way to not only celebrate, what had healed me, but also to put into the collective an example of something that I think it desperately needs.
I've seen a lot of different examples of that in other people's writing. Michael Ian Black had a book that came out a few years ago called The Good Man, and it was letters that he was writing to his son. And just it's a conversation that I think needs to happen more and more as we sit here as two white men. We're trying to do the right thing, and trying to figure out what the good thing is.
But I think
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it transcends that, because a lot of the people that I were talking on the road were not white straight men that were very interested in having these conversation, and were, I found that, through having this conversation, not that race and gender doesn't matter, but
Mm,
it was a uniting thing amongst these other men that would appear different than me, but like when we were talking about these things, we were very connected. So
yeah.
I do think that that need transcends all of that. Not that those things aren't important; they definitely are.
I think it just kind of creates the conflict that
Yes.
just in the conversation that's out there. Um,
Yeah.
One thing that I would like to get into, if you'd rather not, because it's kind of just a departure, but into your story with your sobriety and the early days of that, with
Yeah.
it, with you kind of being functional. At what point did you kind of discover, like, hey, this is kind of a problem for me?
Well, I learned this term after I got sober. The term is a high bottom alcoholic. And when I read the description of that, it's someone who never reaches rock bottom, and that's the problem is, you can function and nobody thinks you have a drinking problem, but that's also the curse because you're always alone in the secret. And so for years, I would get up, I would go to bed drunk or buzzed every single night, and I would get up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And I was thirsty, and I would have to pee, and every night I would say, I've got to stop doing this. Like I know this is not healthy. And then every day I would work and get stressed, and there the alcohol was. It was the escape hatch at the end of the day, and I just couldn't resist going through it. And so I had some health scares. I remember going to the doctor in my mid to early 40s, and the doctor is young and fit, and this beautiful man. He looked like GI Joe, and he's like, "You have gout," and I'm like, "Gout? Like, isn't that something that 85-year-old people get?" And I'm thinking, I'm way too young for this. And there's another time when I was at the Wright Brothers Memorial with my wife, and there was lightning, and down here, lightning kills people all the time. You got to get in. It's no joke. And so the Wright Brothers Memorial is just this flat piece of land with basically a lightning rod in the middle of it. And
Mhm.
so Alicia and I said, we have to run to the car, and it's life or death situation. So I ran about 10 steps, and I thought I was going to have a heart attack. And I was like, I can't believe I can literally not run to save my life. So there were moments like that along the way. There was another moment too where I went on vacation with friends, and um, a friend of mine took a bunch of pictures and made a photo album for all of us. And I remember looking through the photos and getting to a picture and saying, who's that guy there? And I wasn't joking. And I realized after I said, I'm like, oh wait, that's me. Like I literally didn't recognize myself because I
Wow.
had um, let myself go and become out of shape. And it was just a moment. It was a moment where I thought I literally don't recognize myself anymore. That can't be good. And so I think that the health scares, the combination of getting older, I think too in your 20s and your 30s, you can kind of bull your way through anything. And in your 40s, life slows down a little bit. And I realized that um, I can't drink the way I did and get up the next day and write. That was not something I could do. So it was a lot of things, but I'd felt guilty about my drinking for a long time, not so much because it created a problem, just because I felt this is not the best me. I kind of
Mhm.
intuitively knew that this is not the best me. This is not helping me to engage people in a more honest way, but it's keeping me back. It's not benefiting me. It helped a lot to relieve anxiety. It was great for that for a long time, but I was very dependent on it. I couldn't go to a party without having a drink in my hand stat. When I went to a literary event, I needed to drink stat like right away when I walked in the door. That's not a good thing. It wasn't something I wanted to do. It was something I had to do. And so,
Mhm.
it was kind of death by a thousand paper cuts. It was a lot of things. It was never that one moment when, I woke up in a gutter somewhere and said, "Oh, this is the moment." It was a war of attrition. So,
Well, thank you for sharing that. Um,
yeah.
Listening to the This Young in Life podcast and just reading the book, I kind of got a sense of your passion for going to the movies, but then listening to that podcast. You and I have a similar view. I have 3 young kids, so I don't get to the movies as often as I would like to.
Yeah.
But I still view it as like this communal experience. It was something that I would go to the movies with my dad all the time. How has film influenced your life and your writing?
It's funny. A lot of people will say that my books are cinematic, and I've had some success with optioning them. And of course, it's Silver Linings. So I don't intentionally do that. I don't intentionally write trying to, get a movie deal. I just write the novels the way that I want to write them. But I think I watch so much cinema that I can't help but to create those cinematic moments, to think in a 3-act structure. It's just so ingrained in me. But I also think too, going to the movies was always a religious experience for me. And I say that, I would go religiously, meaning I would go a lot, particularly in my 20s when I lived in Philly and the art houses were available. I would go at least once a week. But I think also, I grew up in a very religious household. And so, when I would go to church, you would hear these stories, and, you create these images in your mind, and, you would hear all the stories of the Bible. And so when I went to the movies, I think I always brought along that religious instinct or baggage, whichever word you prefer. And you'd sit in a dark room and you'd gaze up at this screen at these godlike images, these larger than life images, and there'd be a hush. And I think I was always yearning for transcendence. I mean, that sounds lofty, but I think that's what we go to the movies for. We want to be lifted out of our everyday lives, and I think if we take kind of a dull view of that, or maybe a non-generous view, we could say, well, we just want to be entertained. We want to forget about our troubles. But I think it's more than that. I think that if we take a brighter view of it, we go to the film because we want to know what it's like to live and feel an intensity of life. We want to compress life into 2 hours and go on this journey of a story arc where we're going to find that lift up into something more than everyday life, to realize that life is meaningful and beautiful, and that things are possible, and that the heroes can do a little more than we thought they could do, and that there's something in us that can strive to be better. I take a very, I like all different types of films. Like, I like sad films, but my favorite films are life affirming. They really are. They make me think that I can be a better person than I thought I could be before I went to see the film. And I do think that that's very much ingrained in my work. I'm trying to take the frustration and the pain and the loneliness and the depression and the anxiety and all of these, the tough things about my life, and be honest about that. But I want to put that through an experience where when we get to the end, we feel like it was worth it. We feel like that going on the journey was meaningful and purposeful. And to me, that's very important. It's become, I think it's something that saved my life quite literally over and over again. And I think early on, when I would go to the films, I didn't know why I was going. I didn't know why I wanted to be a storyteller. I didn't know why I felt called to sit down and type words all day long trying to create this meaning on the page. But here at almost a half century years old, I've done a lot of thinking, particularly in my analysis. But I think it's all been an effort to save myself, and offer, that whatever salvation I find to the readers and to the people that come and see the films. And I think we all intuitively want that. I think that's why we keep going to the cinema. I think that's why we keep picking up the novel, because we want to believe that life can be better and that we can be better.
That a lot of that resonates with me. There's so many powerful moments in my life where the moment was just sitting in the movie theater reacting to the experience that I saw on screen. So many are flooding into my mind right now that I'm losing track. But this question is kind of, I've We Are the Light was the first book of yours that I read. Then I wanted to dive into Silver Linings Playbook. Then I dove into The Reason You're Alive. I'm going to have to pick up the rest of your books and read through them. It's a quest now. But
Thank you.
the first person unreliable narrator seems to be your method of writing style from what I've seen so far. If that's accurate, what kind of gravitates you towards that style of voice and that character?
Well, I think first of all, I'm an intuitive creative. And so what that means is, unlike my wife, who will sit down and map out the story arc and do character sketches and, do a map of the town she's writing about and do a lot of preparation before she sits down to write, I just sit down and I wait for a voice and I listen for a voice. And when I hear the voice, I listen to what it tells me and I start writing. And when I can tap into that voice, the writing happens very fast and furious, and it feels like a great high. When I can't tap into that voice, it feels awful. It's just waiting for the voice. And so I think that is just the way that I know how to write. I also think that I am very interested in the psychology of a character, and my work is very much about character study. It's about one person and figuring out their psychology and letting you experience what it's like to ride in that character's mind for 300 pages or however long the novel is. So that's what's interesting to me. I'm as an introvert, as somebody who is an INFJ, I love sitting down with one person and having one-on-one conversations. I am much better than I used to be at being in crowds or at parties, but I would much prefer to be with one single person having a really in-depth conversation than to be at any party anywhere. It's so much more interesting to me. So I think that's just who I am. I love getting intimate with a character and seeing the world through their eyes, putting on that mask. That just works for me. I've tried to write in other ways, and it never feels right to me. It never feels as powerful. And so again, I didn't choose that. It's not something that I consciously, in my MFA days, I actually railed against it. I tried to write, more literary novels. I tried to write in third person. I tried to write, from multi-point of view. But this is the way that works for me. And so that's what I do. And I typically like to read novels that are first person unreliable narrators.
Mhm.
Like a novel, like even something like Huck Finn, I found just riveted, or Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, or, I'm blanking on others, but I've always liked first person voice driven. A lot of Murakami stuff I really like too. So it's just what I prefer.
Yes. You're reading through my notes again I'm curious what you're reading now, or if you have any book recommendations.
Oh wow! I mean,
This is always the hardest question.
yeah, I know. It's so yeah. So what's on my nightstand? There's a ton of stuff. I'm reading the Murakami nonfiction book, Novelist as Vocation. I'm almost through that. I just started Kevin Wilson's new one. Now is not the time to panic.
Love that
Yeah,
book.
I'm just too in, and I love Kevin's work. He was kind enough to blurb my book, which is, it was amazing. Um, I'm almost finished Justin Cronin's The Ferryman. Again, another person who blurbed my book. And that's the thing, when you make friends with these writers, you're always just reading your friends' work.
Yeah.
And it's not obligatory. I want to read it. I enjoy all of those writers, and I'm not friends with Murakami, unfortunately. I wish I was. So those are the three that are sitting at the top of my pile right now. But honestly, on book tours, it was hard to read, and when I'm writing, it's tough to read as well. But I recommend my wife's books very highly. I better say that for the sake of my marriage. I do love Alicia's work. She's a wonderful poetic writer, and my buddy Nick Butler, I love his stuff, and Nick's stuff is great. If you like my stuff, I think you would slide right into Nick's. And he did
I feel like
Shotgun Love Songs.
I
Yeah,
have definitely read Nick Butler, but I'm blanking on the title. It was a while back.
yeah, he had one called Godspeed out last year. He has a wonderful short story collection called Beneath the Bonfire. He did a book called Little Faith, The Hearts of Men. I think that's all of Nick's book. Nick is a very good friend of mine, so I should just put that out there. But I became friends with him because I was given Shotgun Love Songs to blurb by not Nick, someone, a third party. And I just fell in love with it. And, I wrote him a letter saying how much I love the book, and I blurbed it. And over the years, we've become close. So Nick's stuff is great. You can go on and on. I never know how to answer these questions because, there's a billion. I just end up saying my friends, it feels safe.
Well, and I don't know why I asked, because I don't need help with my to be read pile, but
yeah, right.
For people I read.
Yeah, and
I appreciate the connections and the relationships that you build. I feel like through these virtual events, and then like the ability to, or the advantage that I have of being able to read advanced copies of books and connect with those authors after the fact. It's nice it's a privilege to be able to have these conversations. So I appreciate you taking the time and
absolutely
replying to my reply.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, and thank you for keeping the book in stock in your store and telling your community about my work. It means a lot to me. So I appreciate what you do.
Is there anything that you'd like to add? Is there any like big takeaway that you hope people have from reading We Are the Light?
Well, the answer I've been given to that question is, I want the reader to feel that they're worthy of giving and receiving love. Again, I think this book is about radical love and what we can accomplish if we truly love each other. And I've been talking a lot. I don't have the quote memorized, but Jung has a quote about how love and power are the shadow of they're the opposite, the shadow of each other. And so if you love something, you don't want to have power over it. And if you want to have complete power over something, you can't love it. And I think as we talk more and more about the issues of power, and I think those are really important conversations to have. I'm not implying that we shouldn't have those conversations. I think sometimes we relegate love. We think we got to talk about power, and that's really important, but love kind of falls to the wayside. And I think this book, what it's asking readers to do is like, let's return love up here. So we're talking about those things equally, and I think that I think that's really the message that I wanted to get out there, to remember that I think deep down, all human beings want the same things. We're just arguing about how to get those things, which is an important argument to have, of course. The other thing I will say is, if anybody enjoys what we've been talking about tonight, or you enjoy my work, or you're curious, I do put out a monthly personal letter every month on the 21st. It actually came out today. There's an archive on my website you can check out. It is not a newsletter. It's an intimate personal letter that I write every month to my readers, and people seem to enjoy it. You can subscribe for free, or you could sample the archive if you wish. So check it out.
I blame you for listening to Tori Amos all day today after reading
there you go.
your letter from this morning.
I appreciate following along.
Yes, I've come to look forward to the 21st now, to receive those. So thank you for that.
That's great.
Thank you so much for everyone that watched tonight. Thank you, Matthew and Avid Reader Press. Really enjoyed this conversation. The book is available in our store. It's also, we just launched a new website a couple weeks ago, goodneighborbooks.com. We have signed book plated editions available to purchase through there. I always feel weird doing the sales pitch at the end, but it's necessary.
I know. Also, support the local indies. Buy from this guy. Support him.
Buy from me, but also I like to support my other indies. If you are in a community and they don't have it in stock, tell them that they should, because it's a great book. Thank you again so much. Have a great night.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Bob.
You're welcome.